Matt Sullivan. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success here at Akumina. We're excited to be hosting this session today with our partners at Synozur, where we want to take a dive into transforming your digital workspace. Looking at the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about first introducing our panelists. Then we're going to go through, what is a digital workspace, what it takes to conduct digital transformation in that area, a little bit of current trends and predictions that we're seeing in there. That prediction is going to be AI heavy, I'm going to tell you. Then we'll talk about some of the best practices and examples of award-winning experiences that both sides have seen. Again, we'll talk about digital work or digital AI coming into the workplace. And then we want to leave enough time for thoughts and observations. I will mostly be moderating after the introductions, so I will take a look at the webinar chat, the Q&As, so feel free to type in there. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. And also, we will be sending out a link of the recording once it finishes rendering. And with that, I will turn it over to Michelle and then Ed to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Michelle Caldwell, CEO and founder of Synozur Alliance. Spent the last 20 plus years in this space, supporting and helping customers transform their digital workplaces. My firm, we are primarily focused on strategy and design in terms of employee experience, and this is a topic I'm fairly passionate about, so I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Matt and Ed.
Great.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to have you here as well. My name is Ed Rogers. I'm the founder and CEO of Akumina. And a little bit about our background. I come from the engineering side of the world. I was a developer at one point. Both me and my team come from the world of web content management, which was really important because we've gone from working with the digital consumer to now with the digital employee. So our whole concept on the Akumina side is building out a digital workplace that really drives employee experience.
Great. Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit more about Synozur and your practices?
Really briefly, thanks, Matt. So we are a woman-owned boutique advisory firm, and I spent over decades in the big five consulting and running practices for much larger companies, and decided that we would break out and start this smaller, very focused company that takes empathy and human-centered design at its heart in core practices in terms of transforming the employee experience. And some of our focus offerings around operational transformation. We do offer some fractional CXO services to our customers in the ecosystem. Obviously focus on employee engagement, which is the topic of the day, AI strategy design, and we also provide some extra help with our clients in terms of delivery and product management support. We're not an implementation firm, but we do help our clients work with other implementation firms in terms of their journey and making sure that the employee-centric voice is well represented and that they have great support in terms of delivery and getting to their North Star. So thanks for that, Matt.
No problem. Ed, I'll give you the opportunity to do the same. Tell us about Akumina.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we have a strong background in the world of web content management, and that gave us a special interest in the world of the digital employee. So we built a multi-tenant platform that's really designed to engage with the employee, drive the employee experience, but to really bring the business closer to the employee and the employee closer to the business and drive the overall feelings of those employees as far as the internal brand of the business, allowing the business to communicate their mission, and drive the culture of the business.
Great. So we'll kind of dive into it from here. In what is the digital workplace, and what what type of empowerment takes place from enabling that technology into employees' hands. So I know both of you probably have perspectives on it, so I'll let Michelle start.
So I think, we've seen a big transition in terms of one, how organizations look at digital workplace, and two, in terms of how employees, what they expect. And I've been in the, I guess we call it internet business, quite a while. And where I've seen many organizations start, I mean, we're still sometimes coming across, growing organizations that don't have an established practice for a digital workplace. Perhaps it's, I guess, in the realm of the pandemic, which I think we're quite well past now, some younger organizations kind of leapt into this space in terms of Teams and other ways, like Zoom. Today we're using Zoom and interfacing with each other remotely. However, digital workplace, I think, really encompasses kind of that central cockpit or hub of getting work done, finding information that matters to you, hopefully, and perhaps connecting into the culture of the company you work for, having an affinity with others with similar interests, and also being able to get news and information around topics in the company that are most of interest to yourself, your job, maybe your division, your department, maybe you're part of the world, and being able to feel like you're connected to that. And so I think, today we're going to dive in a little deeper on what does good look like? How can you maybe raise the bar potentially in terms of meeting those expectations, and talking a little bit more about what are those expectations that today's workforce, multi-generational, right? We have 5 generations in the workforce today. Many organizations took advantage of this opportunity to capture talent anywhere in the world during our shift in how we think about where we work and how we work together. So to me, digital workplace is this kind of digitally connected location, if you will, remotely, where employees come together to experience the culture, the stories, their work, and connect in a meaningful way. So,
Great.
Yeah, and I certainly would agree with much of that. If you talk to Gartner, they'll tell you that digital workplace is a strategy, not a single platform, and they're right about that. You have information all throughout the organization, different applications in different departments and in different areas. So part of the digital workplace is how you go across that information, but more importantly, how you experience it as well. Creating a digital workplace where employees can seamlessly and frictionlessly connect with the information and the data that they need to help get their jobs done. But it's really important to make sure that that digital workplace provides a lot of context in the extent that the employee has an awareness about what their role is in the organization, as well as what's going on around them in the organization. You don't want to go down the road where the digital workplace creates these silos, which is one of the things we often see when there's not a strong strategy behind rolling out a digital workplace. So ultimately, you want to make sure that your strategy is driving a communication strategy. I'd actually argue a internal branding strategy, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, as well as how the employees are engaging in that digital workplace, and how is that the employees are getting supported in that digital workplace.
yeah, I think, Ed, that's an excellent point. Without the voice of the employee and having a strategy and how you're going to connect to that, it's hard to get people to, come to the trough, if you will, or come in and experience this digital workplace. So I think strategy and voice of employee are absolutely at the core.
Yeah, I often think, Michelle, that's what often missing is that there's too much focus on the technology itself and what it can do, and not that the technology actually support an actual strategy, right? How to keep the employee engaged and how to keep the connectivity going. Because as we do have this remote working going on, and there's always going to be some level of remote working, you run the risk of creating this disconnection between employees, between the groups, and even between the business. And so how do you make sure you bridge that gap? And this is where I'd say it's more than just technology. It's how you implement it, how you use it, and how it gets adopted.
We have to humanize, put people at the center of this kind of stuff, or what are we
Exactly.
doing? Right.
Yeah. I talk a little bit about the fact that when you have an employee that feels good about their work, they feel good about the team they're working with, and they feel good about the business they're working for, that employee typically overperforms, goes the extra mile, and represents their business very positively to their customers. And for a lot of C-level people, that's exactly what the goal they want to drive. And the byproduct of that is retention. You have people that feel good about those three things. They will not be out looking for other jobs, and that's important because there's also an undervaluation of what it means to lose knowledge. Because when people leave, knowledge leaves with them.
Couldn't agree more, Ed.
That's great. So actually, there was a couple interesting points that I think is a great transition to the next topic around the importance of digital transformation. Michelle, you mentioned how there was kind of a haphazard adoption of platforms during COVID without much thought of strategy or intent towards digital transformation. It was more of uh, a, a forced change due to the work from home climates. And then Ed, you touched on some of the aspects of some people will call it soft metrics, but definitely the idea of better retention. We've seen cases of better hiring and onboarding through digital transformation. And there's been plenty of studies about increased productivity from quote unquote happy employees. So there's definitely the importance of digital transformation. What do you guys think are some of the strategies that go into these types of project initiatives within an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. One of the things I've observed over the years, and retired, recovering, Microsoft MVP, RT, is I've come across a number of clients that they get very excited. Like there's a lot of passion in a lot of our customers in terms of wanting to do the right thing for their employees, and technology is getting more and more exciting all the time. And so I've come across a lot of our customers that got really excited and saw demos and got like all, wrapped up in the potential promise of what the technology could deliver to their people and how it's going to make life better and easier. And sometimes forgot to get the strategy nailed down, right? Like why the technology, and what are we going to do with it exactly, and why us, and why now, and how do we actually service the employees in a way that's going to be super helpful. So I think, Ed touched on it earlier. Strategy is absolutely important. It's never too late to, sometimes when clients reach out, they're like, oh, we kind of got over our skis, or we got ahead of ourselves, or we have something, but like we're realizing now we want more out of it, or maybe we didn't completely hit the mark. It's like it's good, but it's not great, or it could be, it's great, but it could be amazing. How do we do that? And so I think having an idea of like what amazing is, and being able to define that culturally and organizationally, and making sure that fits into what you're delivering. And that can be, over time. It doesn't all have to happen at once. I think we're well out of the era of like kind of the big boom, like on premise, I have to release the most perfect thing all at once and wait many years to build it. I think most people nowadays with, where technology is kind of used to the like, being fed capability over time is okay, as long as we can communicate where we're headed. And I know that where you're taking me is somewhere I want to go. I often used to relate this to going on like cross country road trips with kids, or, if you don't tell them where you're going, they're going to keep asking if you're there yet. So I think communicating the strategy is important. Having a strategy is important. Making sure that all is representing the voice of the employee, understanding what their needs are, what their pain points are. If it's knowledge based related pain points, like how are we going to make the content better? How are we going to make things easier to find? How are we, I come across a lot of people in benefits who are like, nobody's taking full advantage of all these amazing benefits that, our company's investing in. And oftentimes it's because they don't know about it or they can't find it. So making that stuff more available and obvious to the employee about how much the company's investing in their well-being and making it easy for them to engage in the culture that's also being built by, senior leadership. So, it's a big mouthful, but I think, strategy is super important. And then kind of open communication is also really important.
Well, it's interesting you touched on one thing in there, and like the omnipresent idea of working from home, working remotely. That kind of takes us into the idea of omni work and flexibility. I know, Ed, that you touched on that earlier, saying that we're kind of in the work from home or work remote paradigm now. So how do you think the technology translates into affecting that?
It's about maintaining context, right? I got to be able to go across those different channels and those devices or what environment I'm in, understood where I came from, and is able to continue to give me a frictionless experience in what I'm trying to do. While that's happening, you want the business to be able to drive communications through those different channels at the same time, right? So that's critically important, because if you're restarting something just because you change the different digital channel you're in, that's creating friction. So I always go back to about, if you want to drive adoption, if you want to drive productivity, you got to figure out how to reduce friction. I think one of the things that Michelle was pointing to is, and she talked a little bit about where they're going and communicating that journey. That's the biggest part of this. This is a journey. This is not just delivering a solution and then you're good for 5 years. The technology is evolving. It's probably evolving faster now than it ever was before. The digital expectation, the digital experience expectation is going to evolve with it. So you want to make sure that you can take your customer on a journey that evolves with that expectations and meet that expectations. And the reason why I go back to why I think the strategy is so important and that roadmap is so important is that you don't find yourself in a corner as those expectations change. Because one thing you did see that happened during the pandemic, there was a massive movement to get software out there, and that left a lot of people in a corner and missed a lot of expectations. I remember, 22, 23, a lot of people talked to us about, we did all these big initiatives and we're trying to figure out now where's the ROI on it, right? So you never, when it comes to enterprise software, you're never going to be successful if you don't put a lot of upfront planning and thought into that roadmap as you roll those solutions out.
Great. Now, actually, I think you both kind of started to touch on the idea of the strategies for the digital workplace. Michelle, you seem to be a little bit more attuned to how these organizations are putting together those strategies, especially in today's world, and how they're starting to find the goals they want to get to. Can you talk a little bit about what you think are the 5 key ideas there?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So one of the things that I think this has held true for, as long as I've been in this space, which has been a couple of decades, it's just become more like critical, I guess, to pay attention to these things now that we are, many organizations took the opportunity during the pandemic to find best talent regardless of location, which was, pretty great, pretty amazing, especially given some places where talent maybe not have been considered prior to the pandemic in these kind of remote hybrid environments. But these strategies around communication, having a strategy for how we communicate to our employees, regardless of where they're working from, I think is really, really key. And oftentimes these digital workplaces now, what used to be very heavily IT driven, IT sponsored, are now more on the business side, communications led, having a strategy around what we're communicating and how and through what channels, as Ed mentioned earlier, making sure that that digital workplace heavily represents the internal branding of the organization. Again, if we are working remotely, hybrid, in person, like all of these different ways of working, making sure that we're leveraging our digital workplaces to drive culture what is the culture of the organization in which you're working for. It's, you know, can be very challenging if I'm working from home like I am today, if we're not using these platforms to drive the culture and engagement of our employees. How do they experience that? So we have to be really thoughtful about how we're using these opportunities to drive the culture. Having a strategy around how are we going to engage our employees, whether that's through stories or communities, or whether that's imagery in terms of like how we're communicating in a visual way, what we're trying to get across to our employees, how we're engaging them, having a two-way conversation, great feedback mechanisms plays into that engagement strategy. Productivity. So a lot of organizations are looking for gains. I was just reading a McKinsey report yesterday about the opportunity in the auto, dealership segment, in terms of like 1% of productivity gain for a dealership is equal to, I think they said $500,000 of gained revenue. That's significant if you think in terms of just an auto dealership. So there's these amazing opportunities to gain productivity that's, right time, right moment. When we're thinking about digital workplaces, it's not just an, internet for news anymore. I expect there to be kind of a hub of work, if that makes sense. Having integration to applications that really matter in terms of my job and in terms of maybe knowledge I'm seeking, or stuff I need to service my customers. And then lastly, adoption. So adoption isn't just training, right? We have to think about adoptions in terms of what we're designing, what's the information architecture, not just external, campaigns, but internal campaigns. Like I think I've seen a drop off in many organizations in taking a thoughtful approach to, wholly encompassing adoption strategies for things like digital workplaces, things like generative AI, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Just really being thoughtful about how we're helping people come along with us on these digital workplace journeys, and what are the goals that we're setting in terms of like what we're trying to accomplish and why we're investing in these things. So I think these are all very important things to consider on the journey. And it's okay if you're already on the journey. You can always bring some of this stuff along, on the way. If you're already there on the road trip and you want to add, some extra stops to make it better, that strategy can come to play at the beginning, or it doesn't matter if you're midway through and you want to enhance your outcomes. It's not too late. So.
Yep. So one of the things, the number one priority you talked about is like a communication strategy. It's one thing I noticed when I made a transition from marketing communications, customer experience into the internet journey, was that initially a lot of organizations tend to have a shotgun approach, that all information, all communications they would put out for everybody. And while the idea was, hey, the right message is going to hit the right person because everyone gets it, it actually created a very large signal or noise to signal ratio. What are you seeing in terms of what's happening now with targeted and directed communications within like that digital workplace?
Well, I think we're seeing a couple of things, right? Even if we think about big organizations, right, that I feel like probably should have learned these lessons many, many, many times, like, Microsoft. I'll pick on them for a second, if you will.
They can take it. Yeah.
Everyone Teams, right? Everyone Zoom, everyone everywhere all at once. And what we're seeing now is kind of a step back in terms of these major software platforms and saying, oh, we should do more targeting. We should make this something that, let's hone the noise, if you will, and make it easier to pay attention to the stuff that matters. I think we're seeing a bit of a renaissance in terms of content governance and the importance of tagging your content and being able to target your content. If you think about just, if I think about my mobile device, I'm much more likely to pay attention to the alerts that are targeted to the stuff I've told, the applications in which I subscribe to. Like, I care about these topics, or I care about when these 5 people post something, let me know. versus I'm just going to be like opening up stuff at broad spectrum and hoping to find some value in the massive stream of information that comes at me every day. So I think we have to be thoughtful in contextualizing what we're trying to reach our audiences with and why would they care. I think so I guess that hits on the first point about being contextual and thoughtful in terms of what we're communicating and the content that we're targeting. And if you haven't done that content governance work, there's no better time than now. There's a lot of technology, including AI, that can help make that possible. And it's just super important to make sure that that context is there. Otherwise, I'm probably going to ignore it because we're all being bombarded with more information than we could ever consume every day. Current trends in 2025. I mean, this is, I feel like the year of Gen AI and genetic, we're calling it bots. And what are we calling this now? We're calling it agents.
Agents.
Agents. Now we're in agents. It's all agents everywhere. Probably too many agents to, again, even pay attention. And then remembering that we have professional marketers. Most of our organizations have these amazing, talented people. Hopefully, maybe some of those are on the call today listening in that have been using marketing techniques to reach customers. So let's bring those internally and let's consider those for our employees because they work, right? We have all these amazing techniques that we can turn internally to help our people that help our clients in our everyday work. And then I've shifted years, a couple years ago from saying, let's launch minimal viable product, an MVP, and saying, let's launch instead a minimal lovable product in terms of a digital workplace that employees will love and come along on the journey with us versus, oh, I'll put up with it because it's minimally viable. I think that we're all kind of tired of being, half delivered to and overpromised. So let's really communicate the care and put employees at the center of that. And let's focus on lovable experiences that we can bring forward.
I really love the fact that you used the term marketing techniques, because if you looked at a public-facing site 10 years ago and an intranet of that same company, it was totally vastly different. And I remember talking to a customer out in Europe, massive customer, phenomenal branding, and they asked me, what do you think about our branding from a public-facing side? And it's well established, it's engaging, it's modern, it feels like you're on the edge based upon the technology they were selling. And then they showed me this is what we show our employees when they come on board. And it was such a letdown because it was completely different. Because at that time, they weren't viewing the internet as a form of marketing, internal marketing, right? And this goes back to our experience where you have the digital consumer. What about the digital employee? So what we found with our best customers is that they're taking those marketing techniques and they're bringing them internally because their internal brand is now becoming as important as their external brand. And we love that. And by doing so, once again, it drives that retention, it drives that employee engagement, and it drives that productivity.
Yeah, whenever I see a disconnect in external brand versus internal brand, I think, what would it be like if Apple had the Apple Store and the beautiful interface, UI, UX, and then suddenly the employees are just going to a plain old HTML or SharePoint site internally? It completely disconnects them from the idea and the mission of Apple at that point, where not having seen Apple's internet, I am 100% guaranteed that what they offer to their employees helps to make their employees brand ambassadors externally and advocates.
And what's interesting there, Matt, is that I'm going to go back to this customer. That digital experience, and they talked a lot about new hires, millennials. That digital expectation of those new hires were far higher than what the digital experience that they were delivering internally. But because of their external branding, they expected it to be the same. So when I got out of school, going into corporate America was an increase in digital experience, not a decrease. But that's not the case for my kids. My kids, they're having a phenomenal digital experience and expectation being set way before they take their first jobs. So once again, it's figuring out how to meet those digital expectations, how to get them engaged, and then by doing so, how do you drive the productivity in the brand?
Yeah, I mean, Ed, we're talking zillennials now.
Yes, right.
We're zillennials. And, if I think about my youngest, he's 23 and he's had an iPad in his hand since he was 2.
Yeah.
You can't, and they don't, by the way, they don't use email really.
Nope.
So the way we're going to communicate with the zillennials is through apps and through messages and targeted. They have no patience for things that aren't, they've grown up in a digital world that was always targeting them.
Yes.
So they just don't have patience. They won't put up with it. I read a study years ago that organizations were losing talent because when they were onboarding even Gen Y before those millennials,
Yep.
they got in and the digital experience at their job was so deprecated, if you will. They would basically walk out within weeks because they just weren't going to put up with a digital experience that was behind the times. So attracting talent for these incredibly talented young people who have been in the digital era since they can remember, they don't have the tolerance of some of us that kind of came up through while these things were becoming new and desirable. They expect it to just be there. So we really have to consider, I think I mentioned it at the start, this 5 generational, now 6, I think, but this oscillating multi-generational expectation of how we meet those demands.
One interesting point as well is, you mentioned, Michelle, that millennials don't really use email as much as they're looking for notifications or other channels. And this is the same group of same generation that has largely been content creators since they were, able to get their hands on an iPad or a camera, which
Right.
there's the idea that there's casual content creation, posting to social or posting or commenting and interacting in a social manner versus that structured or professional content authoring. How do you see that those play together within corporate intranet digital workplace communication strategies?
They have to. I mean, number one, they have to now. It's been a trend for a while, but it's almost like it's table stakes now that we have to offer a balance. I 100% believe in content governance. I've built my career in some of this stuff, but we have to have a place and a space for this casual authorship and conversation, and we can still build governance around that. Let's not forget that our identities follow us in our corporate lives and our social lives. Like, you're not going to post something and I'm not going to know who did it. So, there's some education and support there that we can put in place. But I think professional authorship is very important in terms of communicating brand. As Ed mentioned, like this enablement of being a brand ambassador and understanding your cultural values at your organization, your products, your services to your clients, all of that stuff is very important and should absolutely, I think, be put in the hands of those professional content authors. But then it's like, what brings you to the, the digital workplace, if you will, in the morning or catching up with stuff is that human connection. We saw studies on this too about, in terms of return to work, what actually brings people into the office, which I think is an interesting translation to digital, wasn't their bosses, it was their coworkers, and the stories and the catch-ups and the personal engagement side is why people are more interested in even commuting and going into a physical workplace. So why would that be any different in terms of a digital destination for workplace? So we got to make place and space for those casual authors and those things that connect us as human beings, that make us show up every day to like hang out with our favorite people and do work we love. We have to have a place for that content to live and engage our coworkers and the people that we show up for every day. Yes, we show up for our customers, but ultimately we go to work every day to show up for our coworkers. We have to have place for that.
Yep.
And I would argue in this scenario here, Matt, this is an example where the technology has to be able to support the strategy, right? So you look at those professional content authors, they need a true editorial experience. They need to be able to create content, tag content, categorize the content, and target the content. By doing so, they're able to execute those marketing techniques that Michelle already talked about. On those casual content authors, that has to be a different digital experience. It has to be straightforward, easy, just managing, for example, a page, because they're only going to be managing that content maybe once a month. So that's why I always talk about first understanding your strategy before you start mapping the tools. Then you're able to map the tool set to those strategies.
Yeah, I
Yep.
mean, this was one of the initial reasons why I fell so in love with Akumina was this author experience being both amazing for the professional category, the marketers, the comms leaders in an organization, and also being friendly enough for your casual authors to have an experience that you don't have to necessarily have a lot of training to engage with. And then your, translation, there was just so much goodness in the content authoring side, which is what keeps the experience fresh, right? If the content's stale, like, why am I going to come back? So this was one of the original reasons why I was, super in love with Akumina, was this author story in terms of being able to service lots of different types of authors
Yep.
into that experience. So
That's perfect segue into the idea that content is king, and some people would say that targeting is queen on in that combination. But it's the idea of having that very corporate driven or organizational driven communication, but then having those casual content pages. Sometimes we see especially around whatever a specific month might be. You'll have Pride Month or Native American Appreciation Month, and that you'll start to set up these pages within the internet to recognize employees or recognize the efforts of the organization. And how do you get that out there? How are you effective in distributing that and enabling people to quickly spin up those instances without going and creating shadow intranets or shadow IT?
yeah, I think, we had some clients unfortunately affected by the California fires recently. And, you know, thank goodness they had some capabilities to rapidly spin up some ways to communicate to their staff and their employees about what are we doing, and furthermore, how are we helping our people in terms of going through a crisis. So I think it's really important that, you know, organizations have capabilities to do that so they can express their culture and core values in more ways than just an interesting story to their employees. I guess that touches a bit on the channel effectiveness, right? In terms of like being able to have channel effectiveness, isn't just, I don't know, an annual report or how we, performed over the last quarter in sales. It's also about the human factor. And that's why employees stay at organizations so they feel cared for. So that being able to do that in a thoughtful way is, I think, really important. And relevance. I mean, I'm not going to, I guess you can make it my default browser page if you want. And if you want to call those hits important, great. But I'm going to stay and hang out if there's stuff that's relevant to me and actually helps me get my work done or helps me leverage the wonderful benefits the organization offers me as an employee. We're seeing that landscape change quite a bit, right, in terms of what employees value in terms of organizational benefits of being able to communicate that effectively to your employees so that you stay competitive in the landscape. And then, being able to feel connected to your leadership. So I think, content comes to life in many, many ways. And we have to be thoughtful about how we're representing that to our people.
Ed, you like to talk about content targeting, especially based upon who the person is? Like,
Yeah.
where do you really see that stepping into content creation?
Well, I think it's twofold. It's not just content targeting, it's also personalization, right? Because it's all about what's relevant to the user. But by combining both, you're creating a unique content experience for those employees. But when you step back and say, okay, if the employee is coming to the site because there's content that they've subscribed to, they have some interest there. But now that you know the eyeballs are on the site, corporate now has the ability to target content that they know is relevant to them or helpful to them, and actually get it in front of those eyeballs while they're consuming the content they're subscribed to. So combining the two strategies together, the ability to personalize the content as well as targeted content, actually creates one of those marketing techniques that Michelle talked about.
And freshness. It's by enabling more content authors, is you're able to have more, I guess, publishing consistency. Because you don't want an internet that only gets updated once a month. And people know it's going to be on the 15th, so they don't visit until the 15th.
And doing that inside the visual brand of the business. As I keep going back, our best customers, internal brand is very important to them. So they do not want to have disconnected visual experiences as people actually publish more content, right?
Yeah. You talk about the visual branding and relevance to the end user. I think of one of our it's a global banking corporation where they have their internet split out by countries and then departments within the countries. But one of the things that they do is within the country-based sites is there's a lot of visual display of that country's culture, whether it be icons or statues or places of interest. So that way, if you go from the Turkish site to the English site, it's not just the brand that stays consistent, but what changes is the association to the people in that geographical area, which is something that helps drive engagement on their end.
It's funny, Matt, because when you look at our customers and we roll out the site for the very first time, number one reason why someone comes to that site is for search. They're there to find something, need to get something, right?
But
what we find over time is that by going there for search and basically that's one way to wreck a site is not having a good search. But by going to search, they get exposed to some of that content, and then eventually you start hearing these employees talk about, I start today by reading what's in the news. I want to know what's going on. Not because it's the default on their browsers, because they're actually engaged in great content.
Yeah, it's interesting and developing that, when you have a globally dispersed or regionally dispersed organization, your employees want to feel connected to each other. They want to be seen individually, like regionally or culturally, but they also want to know what's going on with their coworkers. They want to feel part of that. I recently was working with a customer and they're like, oh, the social communities, it's really not used heavily in terms of written engagement, if you will. People aren't commenting a lot, but then when we really looked at behavior, some of the cultures that's not even culturally part of the culture, but they were so excited to feel engaged in the stream, if you will, of what was happening around the world with their coworkers, but it wasn't in their culture to comment. So it wasn't that they weren't engaging, if you will. They were absolutely looking at the images, enjoying all of that, feeling closer and a part of their coworkers' day or lives across the globe. But the way that we even maybe measure or define engagement needs to really be thoughtful in terms of cultural norms. If we have, organizations, we're in an organization where we do have people from lots of different places and spaces. So, that feeling of belonging that we can create through these digital experiences is really powerful, and helping people feel like they do kind of all belong to the same team and the same culture and are all in it together to service whatever it is that you do for your customers to feel like one team. So I think it's really a good point.
It's it's a great point, Michelle. So I jumped to the next slide to talk about some of the leading practices that we've seen from our award-winning sites. And one I wanted to touch on was an organization that creates laboratory testing equipment, which in and of itself is just, they do great work, multi-billion-dollar company. But a lot of the things that they do is blood testing, laboratory testing around, especially medical patients. And so they had a big initiative to help people realize what they were doing and how it affected their customers or people out in the world. And they created essentially an Instagram-like experience that was around living the vision. And one of the weirdest metrics that they were excited about is when they launched is the site crashed. Because they were getting so much engagement. Thankfully, our engineers were able to jump in and get it back up very quickly. But the bringing it to the lab techs and bringing it to the office administrators that what you're doing is actually improving lives outside of the four walls. That drove so much engagement for their culture and their organization.
And I think the fact that you can reach them through multiple channels, as you mentioned, Michelle, it's really important for these people to feel like they're important to the business. And now that one of those channels is the mobile device, that means you can now get to those workers who basically were ignored before, those deskless workers that are out working on their feet and working with their hands, right? Suddenly now they can get connected to the company's mission statements, its sense of where it's going, and bring them in as part of the community.
Yeah, I mean, what better brand ambassadors than the people in the field closest to customer? I mean, that's, and I love this first point. We're running close on time, but man, the viewpoint of the new employee has been something that I heavily believe in. If you're not sure how your digital workplace is performing, go talk to some new hires. They'll tell you whether or not like what you think is true, because if they can't find stuff, they'll tell you they're not able to find things, or if they're like, it took me 50 clicks to figure out what my benefits are, whatever that is, right? That new employee viewpoint, if you can make it easy for a new hire, you're going to hit the mark, and generally for most other employees, because they're new to your org. So and they're more likely probably to give you constructive feedback. So I would definitely favor that viewpoint for sure.
So you mentioned that we're running close on time, so I wanted to make sure that we touched on AI in the workplace. One of Ed's favorite words on here is the frictionless experience. So how do you see AI helping that experience for employees?
Yes, for me, AI, as mentioned here, is a sea change. And I think it's going to be as significant as going from DOS to Windows. And what I mean by that is once someone was working in DOS and they started working in Windows, their expectations of all other applications wasn't DOS, right? It changed their expectation. I think AI is going to change people's expectations of how to interact with software. How, that may be up for grabs, right? But I think it's important to make sure that every platform going forward has an AI strategy that doesn't put you in a corner where you can't leverage AI throughout the application itself. What AI does for a lot of these employees is that every employee become a manager if it's done right. They now have an agent that's going to work on their behalf to get something done. But I really emphasize on the fact that be fluid here and be agile as those expectations develop. They may develop in ways you didn't expect, but if you're choosing the right platform, you'll be able to evolve with it.
I think have a strategy. I mean, I see so many organizations, they're just, it's everywhere. They're just like, I don't know, I hate to say it, but show up and throw up, like
Yep.
everywhere for everyone all at once. And there is fatigue, too many agents for too many things, and so many different agents. And what am I even doing with the agents? And I'm often like, think about browser plus what's in the frame of the browser. And if there's 3 agents within that experience, like what's the results and where is it taking me and what is it telling me? We have to be very careful about the fatigue we're going to introduce in terms of AI, and also like how are we giving guardrails and being responsible and ethical and all this other stuff. Most AI agents are designed to please you regardless if they're right or wrong. So just like even training in terms of like questioning what AI gives us, right? It might just be trying to make me happy. If I ask it a question, it may not even be right. So we just have to be really careful. I'm all for it. I use it. My company was, born in the era of AI. But we have to be thoughtful about what we're doing with it.
Yeah, definitely a big sea change. And like I said, there's going to be a lot of moving parts here. And there's going to be different ways of thinking about. One of the things that we argue, Michelle, is that the way to deliver a quality AI isn't the agent itself, it's the knowledge bucket that it's managing. So if you're able to manage that knowledge bucket, you can manage the quality of the response the AI is giving you.
Yeah, takes me back to content governance, Ed.
Exactly what it is. Exactly the same principle. You're right, though. Same principle.
Especially in terms of corporate IPs, you don't want that information going out to public large language models. So how do you protect that, but also enable it to be used to help your employees on a regular basis?
Right.
Yeah. So with that, any final thoughts and observations from the two of you?
For me specifically, it goes back to when you're looking at a digital workplace platform, make sure you're looking at your strategy as well, because the strategy should be understood first so that you can make the right tool set selection that supports that strategy.
And then Michelle, how much strategy do you think somebody needs before they pull the trigger? Is it a crawl, walk, run situation?
Yeah, I think, if you have an idea of where your heading is, if you will, not to lay on my brand too much, but the North Star, if you kind of know where you want to go, like you can set the path along the way in terms of like understanding what you're going to do when and how much of that. And the Big Bang Theory of releases is really not what the appetite of the workforce is anymore and hasn't been for some time. But I also would like, if I can put a final point in something, it's that it is a journey and it's not a set it and forget it. There is so much changing weekly, daily in terms of what's out there, what employees are experiencing in their personal lives in terms of AI, what we were just touching on. Kind of have to keep paying attention, right? And iterating, if you will, and being very nimble in terms of delivering value week over week, month over month, year over year, in terms of how we're supporting our employees. And so I think that's really important to like keep in mind that it's a journey. It's not I did it once and I'm done. I'm done for 10 years because there isn't another release for it because that's not the era we're living in.
It's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Right.
All right. So I know, Michelle, that you have a couple of resources in terms of a digital workplace workshop and updates and a podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit about that to close up?
Sure. Really briefly, we do have a Polaris Pathways podcast where we're often conversating about things like today and many other things. And there's actually a conversation Ed and I have recorded about, I don't know, Ed, what, a month ago, in terms of this topical area. In terms of like what we do, I mean, I would just say if you want to learn more, reach out, let's have a conversation. Most of our customers, it starts with a conversation or a working session, and then we go from there. I mean, our team is a pretty seasoned team. We feel pretty passionately about this stuff, and we love helping our customers engage and reach their internal employees in a meaningful way. So
Great.
thanks for the opportunity today to share space and time with you guys.
Happy to do so. And for Akumina, feel free to visit akumina.com to learn more about the platform and how we enable digital workplaces. Happy to set up a demo if that's the case, but learn more about how a good internal communication strategy really supports your brand and messaging and carries that through your entire organization, not just to your customer.
Yeah, you guys have some award-winning, well-documented examples out there. So,
yep. Yeah, definitely. We can, and we'd be more than happy to talk about some of the best practices that we've seen that make these particular clients award-winning and the internets they delivered to their employees. So I think that wraps it up. We have this recorded. As soon as we get it rendered, we'll get it posted both on the Akumina YouTube channel as well as send it out to all registrants. I know that not everybody was able to attend today, so feel free to share this internally. And with that, we will wrap up, and I'll say thank you from my end and from Ed and Michelle. Great to connect with you and be part of this today.
Great. Thank you all.